We're back now with part two of working with hooks. And what we're going to do now is take this to the next level and use these features to update an audit table. So how would we do that? Well, first we need to create an audit table. And let's say we want to record every single time something is deployed, when it starts, when it finished, so that we can in the future go back and monitor it, whatever we want to do. All right, so I have my Snowflake open. And if you go to the course files here, there's going to be a file called Snowflake Queries under the section for hooks. So if you already watched the video on packages, you should already have a utilities schema, and we're just going to use that for this example. But if you don't, you can use this command to create it, and just make sure you replace your number with whatever student you are. So for me, I'm 000, and you would use whatever you are. The next step we'll do now is create a table for this audit table. So let's go and paste this in here again, replace this with your number. So here it is, empty table, nothing in here. Now, how would we insert values into this if we were just doing it manually? Here's an insert statement. So I'm going to copy this here, insert into, again, replace your number here. I'll have to change this. The run ID is empty right now. We have run object. I'm going to say we'll put the model name eventually. So each individual model would be put here. The activity, run start. We could have run end, model start, model end, things like that. And then a timestamp for the created at. So whenever this runs, it's going to create that. Now I also have this here for UUID string. And this is going to be helpful because what we want here in this audit table is a unique value for the ID. And we could do an incrementing integer, that's possible. But another common way to do this is to use a universally unique identifier, which is a string. Maybe you've seen things that looks like this. It's very common. And we can do this out of the box with DBT as well. So let's just say, for an example here, we run this command and we take this, put it in here, comment this out, and we run this command here. And we just want to insert just to confirm it works. We can also do select from, let's grab this table. Now let's take a look. We should just have that one record in here. And this is what it is. So imagine now we want to have a log of all this stuff happening, but have it tell us the specific model and the activity that happened. We can use hooks to do this. So let's go back to our project here. What we're going to do is insert it for a hook. Let's just confirm that we can do this. So grab this here, copy, and we can put these on separate lines as well. So if you want multiple commands in a hook, you can make them a list, and this will run each item in the list. So I'm going to paste this in here and wrap the whole thing in double quotes. Let's put it on one line. And again, we'll fix this later. Here's an extra quote back here, and I'm going to do the same thing for the post hook. And we'll say, instead of run start, model start, and model end. Let's make this 99 just to prove it's different. I just want to show you how this works first. We're not touching the on run start. So let's now run this and see what happens. Now that we have these different commands, we'll see how this works. So it's going to do these hooks with the start. And let's take a look at the logs. If we go all the way down, here we can see this is the model that ran. So it should be right before it. And here it is. We can see insert into, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it should work. Now let's go back to our audit. Check it out. And here it is. So we can see it did insert through that hook, and we did it twice. Now this isn't really helpful because it's pretty generic, but we'll see how we can fix that. But we can see now how this works, right? So we can see this is being pulled each time through a hook. And if we were to do this through each staging model, it would do it for every single one. So how can we make this more unique? All right, well, first of all, let's see how we can replace this guy here, because we can't hard code this. That's not really helpful. We want a unique value for each time it runs. And the way that we can do that is by taking a look at what's called the invocation ID. And this is going to generate a UUID. So this is really helpful, as it says, for auditing. And so how we can do this here, let's delete this, and we're going to do invocation ID. And add this for both of them. And let's run again. And we're going to slowly make this more dynamic here as we go. All right, so now that started running, let's take a look. We should have another value here. 912, that's right now. And here we can see it gave us a completely different, unique value. And if we were to run it again, it would do the same thing. Great. All right, so now how can we, instead of having this generic model name, how can we make it so that we have the specific model that it's using? Well, that can be done through what's called this. So if we go to this, here it is. As it says here, this is helpful for using in hooks. It's also with incremental models, as we'll see. It's what's known as a relation, which is an object to interpolate the schema and table into SQL code with quoting. So it allows you to do schema, table, database, stuff like that. And if we look here, we can then grab this database, this schema, and we can also grab the model name. So as it says here, this can be the equivalent of ref. That is a neat way to avoid dependencies. So with that said, let's see what happens if we replace model name with this. And it's going to understand for each individual model that it goes through what this is. So to give another example, let's do text store dot star, because there's more models, and let's see what happens. This hook is going to run for each of them. I'm going to run this. We should see it updating as we go. And so we can see it's logging it. Now you kind of get the idea of what's going on. We can see now it's giving the fully qualified name by using this. But with this, we can also say this database, this schema, or we can get the table name by saying this dot name. It'll give the name of the object. So let's say we want to do that. Instead of the fully qualified name, you can go this dot name, and you're going to get the specific name of the model. And do it one more time, and we should see that happen. So again, this is happening now. You can see behind the scenes for every single one, it's running this, deploys it, and then runs these two. And then at the very end, runs this, etc. All right, now let's refresh again. And now we can see it's just doing the name. So that's good. So we're getting somewhere. And you can also see each ID is unique. But another thing we can do, instead of having this hard-coded, is to use a macro. You can call macros with hooks. So let's create a macro that we can call instead of this, and then we isolate that code separately just to a macro and use it that way. So I'm going to create a new file and call it dbt-audits.sql. And ultimately, this is going to have two macros, but we'll call the file dbt-audits. And let's go through the process of just turning this as it is into a macro and see what happens. So if we remember, we'll have the curly braces and we'll call it macro. And then the name of the macro, I'll call this audit log. And let's, before we get too far again, and macro. And everything within here is whatever we want. So let's take this code right here, this insert statement, and add it in our macro. And by doing this, again, we're separating the code out into here, makes it a little bit easier to use. And it's also a reminder that you can use macros more than just formatting different things. You can use it for anything, including insert statements. Another thing to point out here is that we have model start, but we want to use this for both start and end. And in fact, we're also going to want to use this up here at some point. So how do we make this dynamic? Well, we can create an argument. So let's call this run activity. And here we can say, instead of hard coding it, we'll use the argument run activity. So whatever we pass in here will be used here. Let's use this. I'm going to copy this, and instead of this here, what we're going to do is we'll have to wrap it in quotes again, and we're going to add the macro for audit log. And for run activity, in this one, I'll do model start. And for this one, we'll do model end. So now we're making this dynamic, and we can remove these guys here. We could remove this, but let's just keep it. let's do this again now. I'm going to go back to payment app so we don't run all of them. And let's see what happens. Let's just confirm that this step worked. Okay, so it all ran successfully. Let's take another look. And here we can see payment app worked, model start, model end, and this all pulled from that macro. Now let's say we also want to use it up here. What we can do is run this here, and instead of model end, we can say run start, run end, and let's see how this looks. Now there won't be a value for this here because there is no specific model, but it should just leave it empty because there's nothing in that context. And here we can see it's empty for when the run starts, for the run end, but each individual is logged. So the last thing I want to point out here is what happens if there is no audit table. You know, we're doing this insert, but let's just say, for the sake of example, this is gone. What happens when we try to run this? There's nothing for it to insert into. So if we drop this and now we try to run again, what's going to happen? And imagine if this is a CI run or anything really, anyone tries to run it, it's going to run into an error because it doesn't exist. So another way to handle this now is, if you remember on the run start, this is before anything else happens. What we can do is run a command to, here we'll say, we want to create audit table if doesn't exist. I'm going to add this down here too. So how would we do that? Well, there's commands that we can run to just create the table. So here we have create table if not exists. That's basically saying, again, if it doesn't exist for whatever reason, let's make sure it's there. And what we can do here is create a macro to just make sure that happens. So I'll call this audit prep, no arguments. This is a completely separate macro, but we're just keeping it within the same file for simplicity here. And what I'll do is paste this in here. Now there's more things that we're going to need to adjust later with this, and we'll do that in a separate video. But ultimately what we want to happen here is to make sure that this runs at the beginning every single time. That way we can always be confident that that table exists before anything else happens. And if it doesn't exist, it will get created. So we'll do audit prep. And now, again, let me just refresh here to prove that this works. So it's gone now. It failed before. Now let's run it again. Looks like there's an error. Audit prep is undefined when a macro does not exist. Let's go back. And that is because I don't have the term macro here, because it's looking for a macro called audit prep and I didn't specify that. So let's do it again. Okay, so now it's working. So it must have created it. And if we go to refresh, there it is. And we can select from audit. And here it is. It has that run. And if we do it again, it's not going to drop it because it already exists. So it'll just continue on with it. So just imagine, again, you're running in a different environment or a one-off scenario. You still want it there. That is how you do it. And let's just check again. And there it is. So that worked. So that's it for hooks. Hopefully this has been helpful. I know this was a longer one, and in future ones, we'll look at how to actually optimize this a little bit more to make it more dynamic, add some more Jinja functions, and really see it all working together in a little bit more of an advanced way.